On Tuesday, the House of Lords tried to stop the clock on Brexit. We're about to embark on an almighty battle to extricate ourselves from Europe. The last thing we want is a bunch of truculent peers breaking ranks before we've even begun. Some Tory Brexiteers want the Prime Minister to call a snap general election to give her an unimpeachable mandate for her plans for a hard Brexit, thus neatly cutting the ground from under our rebellious peers. But they're taking a sledgehammer to crack a bunch of coroneted nuts. For the Prime Minister already has an unimpeachable mandate, the 52% who voted for Brexit. And she should use this mandate to threaten, and if need be, to carry out a mass creation of peers who are committed to an orderly progress to Brexit. But the Prime Minister shouldn't stop at Article 50 and Brexit. The new peers should also be committed to the long overdue reform of the bloated, anachronistic, expensive and increasingly indefensible upper house. The new House of Lords must be much smaller, largely elected, weighted to the regions and the four nations, and, above all, its legislative role and its subordination to the Commons must be put beyond doubt by a written constitution. For our much vaunted unwritten constitution is now, as the antics of the judges and the peers demonstrate, a source of major instability in this time of national crisis. Theresa May has seen off the Etonians. She needs to call time on the House of Lords.
And thanks to Howard Walwyn Fine Antique Clocks for the use of their beautiful Kensington Church Street showroom. David Starkey joins us now. David, welcome to the programme.
Thank you, Andrew.
Michael, let me start with you. It's 2017. Why is our second chamber still unelected, still partly hereditary, and still called the Lords?
Because there's never been any agreement about what to do about it. I think most people believe that it is not satisfactory. But, for example, I'm not particularly keen on seeing an elected House because I think people who are elected fall prey to the whips of the various parties and lack the independence of some of our very best peers today. By our best peers, I mean people like the Astronomer Royal, I mean Field Marshals and Admirals of the Fleet who've served their country, who would never stand for election. So it has been the lack of agreement on what to do about this that has brought about the present situation. What I think is so unfortunate is, as a nation, we're usually rather good at having unimpeachable processes. We ought to be able to appoint the House of Lords in a way that's absolutely beyond corruption and suspicion. But unfortunately, the House has been corrupted massively by Prime Ministers who have appointed third-rate members of Parliament that they wanted to get rid of at an election so that they could put their placemen in, and of course putting in people who've paid lots of money into their parties.
Lisa, why have we not been able to reform it properly? Well,
because we can't agree on what to replace it with, that's right. But where I don't agree with you at all is about the House of Lords not being elected. I think I agreed with a lot of what you said in that piece, but the problem for me is not that the House of Lords is willing to challenge the Commons. That, I think, is incredibly important. We get it wrong in the Commons quite a lot, and we should be challenged. The problem is that they have no basis to do it at the moment, and the only way
democratic legitimacy
is to elect them.
Tell Michael why he should be elected, or at least partly elected.
Lisa's made the point. We are in a democracy. Not that you would know it, by the way, from the verdict of the Supreme Court. I mean, this again is the problem. We are so unclear what the source of sovereignty is. We prattle about the idea of parliamentary sovereignty. You'll love this, Andrew. Do you know who invents parliamentary sovereignty? Michael probably will. Henry VIII. Henry VIII invents the concept of an independent national parliament distinct from any other form of authority. That's the Pope. And there's only one sovereign in Parliament. Again, Michael will tell us, the enacting clause of an Act of Parliament, be it therefore enacted by the Queen's most excellent majesty. Only the Queen is sovereign in Parliament. The Commons and the Lords merely assent to it. Now, this, in other words, we have a total pantomime. I'm sorry, our Constitution has become a pantomime. It's a Gilbert and Sullivan pantomime that doesn't recognise democracy, doesn't look at the role of a sovereign people, is totally incompatible with a functioning 20th century democracy.
But politicians have found it very convenient. I mean, I don't know if you've seen the BBC documentary, Meet the Lords. In most countries, when politicians' careers are over, they're over. You know, as Barack Obama's career is over. Bill Clinton's career is over.
Begun,
when Angela Merkel steps down, her career will be over. But in this country, they get a second chance. I mean, you saw all these faces. Half of them I thought were dead. And they're in the House of Lords.
They are.
And it suits them. It's the way of the political establishment providing a lovely retirement home that keeps their importance and gives them 300 quid a day as well.
There's a lot in what you say, although, you know, another way of putting that would be to say that you have a house, and, you know, the various forms of this have appeared in history, where elder statesmen go, that you have the value of all this experience.
Most of them are failed politicians.
No, some of them are failed politicians, and some of them were very successful politicians. I mean, unless you take the view that all careers end in tears, that's true. Well, but you know, you can't say Heseltine or Lawson or Lamont were failed politicians.
Well, I maybe give you 2 out of the 3.
In their day, they were very successful politicians. There are a lot of people who should never have been put there in the first place. That's true. And of course, no one can be truly happy with a House of Lords that doesn't contain either David Starkey or Michael Portellet.
Oh my God.
Well, that is self-evidently the case. But Michael, all this is fine and dandy, and there are very good reasons for it. But what happens when, in a major issue like this, the Lords start stepping out of line in a very serious fashion? The Commons itself, and you know this has been a really fundamental problem in the last few months, itself is seriously out of line.
The Lords aren't stepping out of line in a major way. What the Lords did was to say that actually Parliament should have a vote on the final deal. And for someone like me, who absolutely went out and made the case to remain, lost that argument and respects the fact that the people have spoken about whether we're leaving the European Union, I'm also very acutely aware that there were lots of different competing versions of Brexit on offer during the course of the referendum. There is no mandate for any one particular outcome, and it must be debated by Parliament, and there must be the ability of Parliament to hold the government to account. And I'll tell you why, because we heard it over and over again during the referendum campaign, is that the Leavers, the one thing that really united them was that they said Parliament must be sovereign.
Michael?
Well, you have a parliament and you have an executive, and an executive is there to execute things. You cannot have effectively 1,400 members of parliament in the Lords and in the Commons being people who conduct a negotiation. The only thing that would happen if that clause were passed is that the European Union would see that if it were unreasonable, Parliament would reject the deal, and the European Union would have the hope that we would reverse our decision.
Let's not get on to Europe. Let's stick with the position of the Lords. You say it's causing political instability. Explain what you mean.
Well, precisely this, that we are in a position where we're now dealing with a very, very tight timetable. It's a timetable of merely 2 years. We're dealing with an extraordinarily difficult negotiation, the point that Michael has just made now, that if this clause were actually to be accepted, it effectively gives Europe the obvious negotiating tactic: be as difficult as possible, and the negotiations will fail. And I'm sorry, Lisa, you really do have to understand that the Lords is not the proper... No, the Lords...
Very pleased that there's a bunch of men here to explain to me how it works.
Well, there's one man explaining to you.
The real failure have been you lot in the Commons, and particularly the Labour Party. Its inability to take a clear line on this. When you have an opposition that is as weak, as confused, as uncertain, and as badly led...
I'm sorry,
that effectively
nonsense.
opposition
Okay.
goes to the law.
Let Lisa respond.
That
Well,
that
can I-
opposition-
can-
No,
no,
Lisa
no,
needs to
no,
respond.
no,
Yeah, go on.
Well, I'm sorry, but this is just absolute nonsense. First of all, the Labour Party hasn't been weak and confused in our line on
Good
Brexit.
heavens.
Well, hang on,
Well, what
the
a
last row that
wonderful,
there was is because we had
wonderful
a was because we had a whip imposed about how to vote because our position.
How far? Let's not get on
But
to
this
Europe.
is
We're
not an
talking about the
argument.
Lords. How far should the Lords go?
How far should the Lords go in terms of
In the
challenging
two
us
amendments
with
that they've
holding to
passed?
account? Well, I think that they're absolutely right to have passed those two.
No, I know that,
amendments.
but how far should they go?
How far should they go in terms of challenging?
Yeah.
Well, I think they've made their views pretty clear. I think it's now up to the Commons to make a decision. We've got a vote on that on Monday.
And if it-
I'll
if
be
it
voting
knocks it down?
in favour
If
of
it
what the
knocks
Lords
it
have done.
down, what should
I mean,
the Lords do?
ultimately, in the end, the Commons has to prevail.
So
It
basically,
quite
this is just a
clearly the
gesture
House
by
with
the
the,
Lords.
Yeah,
with the
I-
legitimacy. But the point is this, that because of parliamentary scrutiny, the government will therefore be under pressure to come to the House of Commons with a deal that works for the majority of the British people. And that is the importance of the outcome that we need to get.
Do you think the Lords
Is
has
that
done that?
really how a negotiation is going to be conducted? Surely Michael has
Well,
made
if it's
made
not
the
in the
point
interest of the
that-
British people, then it should.
Let me give you.
But
Let me stick
where
to
I
the Lords.
disagree with you,
Michael.
Where I disagree with you, David, is I don't think that the Lords have gone beyond a threshold in what they've
Yet.
done yet.
Yeah.
If they were to reverse the Commons for a second time,
Yes.
then I would unleash, the dogs of war. I would by all means threaten them with the creation of enough peers to get the business through. But I very much doubt whether they'll do that.
Final point to you, David Starkey. Are we not as far away from the democratic reform as the Lords as we've ever been in modern times?
I think we are. And one of the great problems with the abolition of the hereditaries, you seem to carry out, as so much of New Labour, a pseudo-modernisation. And this is, I think, is profoundly dangerous. I think we have a generally unstable constitution. The extraordinary debate over what the role of the judiciary was in terms of, as it were, compelling Parliament to go through with process. All of these things are really dangerous. We are played out with this, as I said, this Gilbert and Sullivan pantomime of an unwritten constitution. And I would hope that this enormous political crisis, because that's what it is, it's the biggest change in politics for well over 50 years, would force us to look again. We've put it off, and we've put it off, and we put it off too long, and we need to do something and then have the courage.
We shall see what happens. I remember when Michael Foot and Enoch Powell got together to stop the reform
I wouldn't
of the
bet on it,
Lords.
by the way, yes.
David Starkey, thank you for being with us.